Hola, I'm Riza, and today we're going to be talking about the Noragami manga, specifically chapter 96, because it has one of the best plot twists that I've seen done in a single chapter, and if you haven't read it already, go read it, because, spoiler warning, obviously, I just ooze spoilers, so spoilers for anything and everything, but I'm going to try to keep it unique to chapter 96 of Noragami, and of course a little bit, and of course before that, and I'm going to try not to spoil that much after that, but just keep in mind Noragami manga spoilers. Alright, let's get going. So a brief recap of what's going on in the story now, because it's super complicated. If you don't know anything about Noragami, you're just going to be really confused. But Yukine has been revealed the god secret to, and he's off fighting Yato as the crafter's weapon, and the crafter is Yato's dad. So that's a little awkward. And Kazuma, Bishamon's weapon, is now Yato's weapon, and now they're fighting each other. And Kazuma is super cool as a weapon, like an actual weapon, and that's like the main thing that I wish gets animated, is just Kazuma as a weapon is amazing. Anyway, so chapter 96 starts out with Yori waking up at Yukine's sister's house, where they've been getting more information about Yukine's past, which is a huge plot point in this arc, just everything. And then Yukine's sister asks Yori some questions, and they have a little bit of dialogue that reveals more about Yukine. And then we get a clip of his sister looking at the letter that Yori and Nora gave to her. And this just reveals that both of them were sending letters to each other, and neither of them got them because their parents are bad. Oh, anyway, like the sad boy Yukine hours. But then we get clips of Yato fighting the crafter, Yato's dad. And during this time, he's calling for Yukine. And he's not calling her his weapon name, he's calling him Yukine. And he's just pleading with Yukine to not go with his dad. And this has been the main driving plot factor for the past couple of chapters, and it's sad. And then we have a brief funny moment with Kazuma trying to fly, and it's pretty funny. See, that the comedy in this very dire moments are what we need. But then Kazuma has a little speech where Yukine and the crafter are getting away, and Kazuma says this to Yato: "Try summoning him. I say this after knowing more of the details. Call Yukine's vessel. You think it's useless, right? But you'll never know until you try. Even when things were awkward after a disagreement, or we were frustrated with each other, or whatever, I would still be so happy when Vina called for me. It was the purest expression that she still needed me. I'm sure Yukine is the same way. Don't you trust him?" Those, I remember reading that and I was like, oh man, this is, it just shows how deep, Kazuma and Bishima's relationship is, but without Yato saying anything, it just shows how distraught he is about this. Because Kazuma has realized that Yato is so worried that Yukine doesn't trust him anymore. I don't think it's about Yato trusting Yukine, I think it's also about Yato knowing that Yukine's opinions of him has changed, and he still doesn't know if Yukine will still come when he calls him as a weapon. And Yato hasn't called Yukine as a weapon in I think over 20 chapters now. It's so sad. Immediately after that, we get a flashback to when Yukine was scratching out his name from his chest and saying that he's not Yukine, and just telling Yato to release him. And Yato obviously is remembering that, and I don't think he believes that Yukine will come if he calls. And Yato doesn't say anything during this exchange, but we see that moment. You just know that Yato is thinking that he just doesn't believe that if he calls Yukine's vessel name that he'd come to him. And then Kazuma ends it off by saying, don't falter. He's telling Yato that he believes that Kazuma still believes that if Yato calls for Yukine, he will still come, even if there's a disagreement. And then we get a little talk between Yukine, in quotes, Hagisa, which is his new name, and the crafter. And the crafter sort of goes on about how Yukine and him are sort of the same, and how Yukine's realizing that, the heavens are bad, all this stuff, everything that has to do with his backstory, and telling Yukine that he's right for doing what he's doing. And then we get clips of other gods coming down to help strike the crafter down, I don't remember their names. I'm in the process of rereading all of Noragami right now, and I just wanted to talk about this chapter, but I'll definitely talk more about it when I've reread it all, because I don't remember all the characters' names. But a few of the other gods chime in to try and take the crafter down, and I believe these are the other gods of fortune trying to take the crafter down. And then we flash back to Hiyori, and she hears Nora outside, and she goes to check on Nora. And outside is a bunch of phantoms named by the crafter, and Nora sees this, and they're updating Nora on the situation, that father is in danger, that Amaterasu, the supreme god, found him, and she's gonna kill him. And Hiyori is encouraging her to not be tricked by them, because Nora has been going through an arc where she's realizing that her father is manipulating her, and she's saying it herself that he's manipulative, he doesn't really need her, and he doesn't really care for her, and so she's been repeating this for a couple chapters now. And then she says in this chapter where she says, "Father's just planning to manipulate me again. I'm not stupid, you know." And Hiyori egged her on a little bit, but Nora's the one who's saying these things, who is affirming to herself that she's making the right decision. He's been neglecting me this whole time, so what does he want now? And then Hiyori has a little thought, so she does get it. So Hiyori realizes that Nora is understanding that he's not good to her, basically. And then we get more of the fight scene with the other gods, and the other gods are discussing, and then we get a clip of these gods calling all of their Shinki, which is really nice in the context of this chapter. Because in the beginning of the chapter, Kazuma was telling Yato to call for Yukine's name, and then we get to see, and we think that by the end of this chapter, maybe Yato's going to call for Yukine, and we'll see what happens when he calls for Yukine, and Yukine's in other weapon form, and that would have been really interesting. That's where my mind was going. I was like, oh, okay, so by the end of this chapter, or in a couple chapters, Yato's going to call for Yukine's name, and that's what I thought it was building up to. Well, Yukine's weapon name. And then we'll get to see that conflict happening of, will Yukine come or not when he calls Yukine's vessel name? But then at this moment in the chapter, we get to see all these gods calling for their Shinki, and they're coming to them, and then they're about to fight the crafter, and the crafter is like, oh man, this is huge trouble, and Yukine's kind of busy right now, doing his thing. Then we see him call for Nora, Mizuchi, the name that he gave her, and that's not her vessel name, that's just her name. And he's like, what's the matter? I said I was sorry, in his manipulative tone, because he's just trying to get her back because he needs her again. And Mizuchi, and he asks, again. And then finally, he says, come, Chiki, which is her vessel name. You can see her before this. She's like, I want nothing to do with you. She's not even looking at him. And then she briefly looks at him, and then he calls her. Then you get a brief moment of Hiyori seeing this happen. And you can see that Nora is so happy. And this is another one of the moments, it mainly happens with Yukine in the beginning, where he's so happy and it made me sad. This is another moment where Nora looks so happy, and I'm like, no, don't do it. But see, this was foreshadowed, because when Kazuma was talking about how Yato should call Yukine's name, Yukine's vessel name, you're meant to think that this is, of course, for Yato to pump him up in the story. But in the story, what Kazuma was actually talking about, even though he didn't know it, in terms of the storytelling of this chapter, is it would foreshadow why Nora still gets summoned by her father, even though she literally just stated that he's manipulative, all these things, and then yet she still comes because of what Kazuma said. Because even how sweet that story that Kazuma stated is, the truth is that it goes both ways. And that's not something that's such excellent foreshadowing, because we, as the readers, think that it's going to be a positive outcome for Yato. Yato's going to call Yukine's vessel name, and he's going to come, and that's what we think will happen. But then Yato doesn't say a word. And then we continue on with the chapter, and then we see Nora just talking about how much she doesn't trust her father, and at this moment I didn't think that would happen. I would just thought that this was affirming, Nora's not going back to him, that sort of thing. But then he calls her name, and then Kazuma's conversation just came back to me, and I was like, this is what he was talking about. Of course this isn't the situation Kazuma was talking about, but this is what it was foreshadowing. because it just shows that the Shinki have such a loyalty to their masters, even if their masters are terrible people. Well, in this case, his master is a human, and if we're going by the lore in the show, then the gods can't make mistakes, sort of thing. I don't know. It's kind of weird. But, like, the crafter is the only person in the show who is not a god that can... Of course, he's kind of now like a god, but he's the only one in the show who's human and can call Shinki. Or, technically, they're Akasha. Both Yukine and Nora are, well, now named Akasha. She knows that he's bad news, but she still comes because it's because of that relationship. It's what Kazuma said about being called by their vessel names. But it's like when Kazuma said it was the purest expression that she still needed me. Nora wants to be needed. That is Nora's entire character. We saw this in previous chapters when her backstory was revealed, is that the reason why Nora is not affected by the God Secret is because she was an unwanted child, and she was never named, and because of that, the God Secret can't be revealed to her, because she never had a name. And to cope with that, she got as many names as she could, because she wanted to feel needed by people, being called by her vessel names and being used by them. But the thing is that this desire in her has just been her being manipulated all this time, because she has never known a good relationship where she is needed but not manipulated. And so even though she knows all these things about her father and all this, when she heard him call her name, she was so happy to go to him because she just wants to feel needed. And like, I have such mixed feelings about Nora, but she is an excellent written character. She switches sides, but she is still always on the crafter's side. But, like, you can see that she has just been a manipulative pawn for him. And if she was raised differently, that she would be a different person. And the crafter literally said this in a previous chapter when he talked about naming Nora for the first time, that he wanted to find a phantom that he could easily manipulate. He didn't, I don't think it was that exact words, but it was something along that lines. He wanted to find a phantom that he can mold into whatever he desired. And that's the product of Nora. And, which is why Nora is such an excellent character. But, oh man, like that's in one chapter. Chapter 96 is so good, because it follows the same thematic, like, elements of it follows a theme. The theme of chapter 96 is Shinki's being called. It's about the relationship and the strong ties to their names being called and them following their masters. First we hear about that from Kazuma, and then we wonder why Yato won't call Yukine's vessel name. And then we see all these other gods call for their Shinki. And then we see the crafter call for Nora. And Nora, even though she knows that he's bad news, that he's manipulating her, that he will dump her whenever he doesn't need her again, but then he'll call her when she comes back. She knows all this, but she just wants to feel needed. And I believe in the next chapter, I have to reread it, but Hiyori mentions that even though they've been building up a relationship, Hiyori and Nora, for a little bit of time, she realized that she doesn't even have a good name to call her by. Because in the official translation of Noragami, she just calls Nora Stray. Like, because that's the translation of Nora is Stray. And, like, that's one thing I realized is, like, she realized that it feels so wrong to call someone that. But that's the only name she has for her. And, man, it's so good. But this chapter was just fantastic, like, through and through. Which is why I just had to talk about this chapter specifically. I didn't even realize that it was one whole chapter when I first read it, because I just speed read through all of this because it was so good and I just needed to know. And I just remembered this moment and I was like, I need to talk about this moment. And I didn't even realize it was in one chapter. And that's, like, so good as a plot twist. That's right. I made this video to talk about what a good plot twist it is. But it's a good plot twist because they set up your expectations in a positive way, and then they change it to something more negative, but it still fit so perfectly, and I didn't know it was going to happen until it happened. Like, he called for his name, and I was like, oh no, and then I just realized that that's what Kazuma was referring to, or this is what Kazuma was referring to, but it's not being used to aid us in the story now. It's now being used to hinder us, and I think that was so good as from a plot twist perspective. And in one chapter, so good, man. Noragami, second favorite manga. I love it. Anyway, I'll probably be making a video about Noragami symbolism next with cherry blossoms. I might need to reread the whole series for that again, because there's so much cherry blossom symbolism throughout the whole series, and I might make that next. So keep tuned. I added this. Anyway, bye y'all.